The factory rep arrived on a Tuesday morning in August of 2024, driving a company pickup with the Piedmont Wood Products logo on the door, and he parked at the gate of Walter Sims's property and sat there for a moment before getting out. He had been told, when he was assigned the task of renegotiating the scrap disposal arrangement that had been running on this property for 20 years, that the farmer at the end of this road was an old man who had been collecting wood scraps from the factory fence line since 2004, and that the arrangement needed to be formalized or terminated because the new plant manager wanted everything documented. And the undocumented arrangements from the previous administration were being reviewed and cleared out of the system one by one. He had been told none of the other things he was now looking at through the windshield of the company truck. The property ran back from the county road for about a quarter mile before it curved behind the tree line. What he could see from the gate was a covered storage building at least 120 feet long, with stacks of processed wood material visible through the open sides. To the left of that, a smaller building with a commercial biochar kiln visible through the open doors, the steel stack running up through the roof. Behind that, further back, two more structures he could not fully see. On the near side of the main building, a flatbed truck with a commercial logo on the door was being loaded by two men in work shirts. The logo said Blue Ridge Soil and Timber. He did not recognize the name and pulled out his phone and searched it. Blue Ridge Soil and Timber LLC was a registered Virginia business, incorporated in 2016, listed under agricultural products and specialty wood materials, with a physical address matching the property he was parked at. The state business registry showed active status, and a commercial sales tax number. A basic web search showed a website with product listings for biochar soil amendment, specialty hardwood flooring trim, kiln-dried hardwood firewood, and a line called Blue Ridge BioBlend, a bagged soil amendment product currently listed at farm supply retailers in 4 Virginia counties and in an online agricultural supply store. The factory rep sat in the truck a moment longer. Then he called his supervisor. He said, "I am at the Sims property." He said he thought they needed to have a different conversation than the one he had been sent to have. Walter Sims had bought his 47 acres in Patrick County, Virginia, in 2001, when he was 48 years old and had just taken early retirement from a regional furniture distributor in Martinsville, where he had worked in warehouse management for 22 years. He had bought it for the same reasons most men who spend their working lives in warehouses buy small farms when they get the opportunity, which was for the specific combination of physical work and quiet and ownership of something that could not be reorganized or downsized or moved to another state. The farm had a house and a barn, and 32 acres of mixed pasture and timber, and 15 acres of cleared bottomland that he thought he would plant in hay. And it was 4 miles from the Piedmont Wood Products furniture component plant that sat in the industrial park off Route 58. He had not known when he bought the farm that the factory was 4 miles away. He had not known, when he learned it, that this fact would become the organizing principle of the next 20 years of his life. The arrangement had started in 2004, the 3rd year he owned the property, when he went to the plant to buy a load of wood scraps for his fireplace. Piedmont Wood Products manufactured furniture components, chair legs and cabinet frames and table parts from Appalachian hardwoods, and the factory generated a substantial volume of scrap material in the process, ends and offcuts and shavings and sawdust, all of it clean, untreated hardwood, primarily red oak and hard maple and cherry and black walnut from the regional sawmills that supplied the plant. The factory had a scrap disposal contract with a mulch producer in the county, but the contract covered only the chip-grade material and the sawdust, not the larger offcuts and end pieces, which were being dumped in a designated pile at the back of the plant property near the fence line shared with the road that ran to Walter's farm. The plant manager in 2004 was a man named Gene Hartley, who had been running the facility for 9 years and who ran it with the specific competence of a man who had been doing one thing well for a long time. Gene had let Walter take a truckload of the fence line scrap for his fireplace and had mentioned because he was a practical man who did not enjoy watching useful material go to waste, that there was always more where that came from, and that Walter was welcome to it anytime he wanted it. Walter had said he appreciated that. Jean had said the alternative was paying to have it hauled to the landfill, and that if Walter could use it, that was better for everybody. Walter had gone back 3 more times that winter for firewood material and had thought about the fence line pile in the way he thought about most things, which was persistently and with increasing specificity as time passed. He was burning some of the material and he was looking at the rest of it and noticing things about it that the fireplace use did not require him to notice. He was noticing the species mix. He was noticing that a substantial portion of the larger offcuts were cherry and black walnut, the highest value species in the Appalachian hardwood mix, in pieces that were too short for furniture component use, but that were not short in any absolute sense, many of them 12 to 24 inches long and 2 to 4 inches wide, with a clear, knot-free grain of furniture-grade material. He was noticing that what the factory was dumping at its fence line was not homogeneous waste. It was a mix of material with very different characteristics and very different potential uses, most of which the factory was not distinguishing between because all of it was, from the factory's perspective, a disposal problem. Walter had spent 22 years in warehouse management. He had spent 22 years thinking about materials flow, about the difference between what something was and what it was worth, about the specific economics of moving material from where it was to where it had value. He looked at the fence line pile and thought about those 22 years and understood that he was looking at a problem he knew how to think about, even if the specific material was different from anything he had managed in a warehouse. He went to the Patrick County Library in the spring of 2005 and spent several Saturdays reading about hardwood lumber markets, specialty wood products, small-scale wood processing, and the specific properties and market values of the species represented in the factory's scrap output. He drove to a woodworking supply store in Winston-Salem and talked to the owner for an hour about what small woodworkers and craftspeople paid for short-grain cherry and walnut material in the sizes he was describing. He drove to a regional lumber dealer and asked about the market for end-grain hardwood flooring, which he had read about in one of the library books, and which used exactly the kind of short, off-cut material that the factory was generating in quantity. The woodworking store owner had said that short-grain cherry and walnut in the 2 to 4 inch width range, kiln-dried and sorted by species, was a reliable seller to small woodworkers and furniture makers at a price per board foot that Walter, doing the arithmetic on the drive home, found considerably higher than he had expected. The lumber dealer had said end-grain hardwood flooring was a premium product commanding premium prices, and that the manufacturing process, while not simple, was within the reach of a small operation with the right equipment. He had mentioned a man in Surry County, North Carolina, who had been making end-grain flooring from furniture factory scrap for several years and who sold it through a regional architectural salvage company in Charlotte. Walter had driven to Surry County the following Saturday and found the man and introduced himself. The man's name was Carl Briggs, 62 years old, and he had been doing exactly what Walter was thinking about doing for 6 years. He had shown Walter his operation, a converted farm building with a table saw, a drum sander, a small kiln he had built from plans he found in a woodworking magazine, and a sorting and storage system for the different species of scrap material he collected from 2 furniture factories in his area. He had shown Walter his pricing sheets and his customer list, and had talked for 3 hours about what worked and what did not, and what he wished he had known when he started. He had said one thing that Walter wrote down in his notebook on the drive home. He said, "The material you are collecting is only worth what you understand about it." Most people who try this fail not because the market is wrong or the product is bad, but because they do not sort carefully enough, or dry carefully enough, or grade carefully enough. And inconsistent quality destroys a specialty market faster than almost anything else. He said the buyers in this market, The woodworkers and the architects and the flooring contractors were paying premium prices for premium consistency, and that premium consistency required premium attention to every step of the process. Walter had written, "Consistency is the product, not the wood." He drove home and looked at the arrangement he had with Gene Hartley through the framework Carl Briggs had given him, and understood that the arrangement was not yet the thing it could become. It was a man with a truck picking up fireplace wood from a factory fence. To become something else, it needed infrastructure and process and the kind of systematic attention that 22 years of warehouse management had taught him to build and maintain. He spent the fall and winter of 2005 building the infrastructure. He converted the old hay barn into a sorting and drying space, dividing it into sections by species, building simple lumber storage racks along the walls, and constructing a basic kiln in the south end, using a design he had gotten from Carl Briggs and a propane system he installed himself with help from a neighbor who did HVAC work. He bought a table saw and a drum sander and a simple moisture meter and a scale for weighing material by species. He built a covered collection area near the road where the scrap loads could be delivered and sorted before moving to the barn. He went back to Gene Hartley in January of 2006 and proposed a change to the arrangement. He said he would take all of the fence line scrap material, not just occasional truckloads, and would do so on a regular schedule so that the factory's disposal problem was fully solved rather than partially managed. In exchange, he asked only that the factory make a reasonable effort to keep the clearly different species separated at the point of accumulation at the fence line, not sorted with precision, just roughly separated so that the cherry and walnut were in a different area from the oak and maple. Gene had thought about this for a moment and said he could ask the floor crew to do that, and that, as long as Walter was taking everything regularly, the factory was better off than it had been. They shook hands, and that was the new arrangement. Walter picked up material every 2 weeks from 2006 forward. He sorted and dried and graded with the consistency Carl Briggs had said was the product itself, and by the end of 2007 he had his first sales, small but real, to 2 woodworking shops in the New River Valley area, who had found him through a classified ad he placed in a regional woodworking publication. The prices he received for kiln-dried, sorted, graded cherry and walnut shorts were exactly in the range the Winston-Salem dealer had described. The oak and maple and other species he was selling as high-quality kiln-dried firewood through a local firewood dealer who was paying him considerably more for the kiln-dried material than for green wood, because the kiln-dried hardwood burned with the consistency and efficiency that his residential customers specifically requested. By 2009, the firewood and specialty wood sales together were generating more income than the hay ground had ever produced. He hired a part-time helper, a young man from the county named Darnell Cook, who was strong and reliable, and who learned quickly and who Walter paid fairly, and whose hours he expanded as the volume grew. He bought a used forklift in 2010 to move the larger quantities of material through the sorting and drying process more efficiently. The biochar idea came in 2011, the year Walter drove to a soil science field day at Virginia Tech's Kentland Farm and listened to a researcher named Dr. Patricia Okafor talk for 45 minutes about the use of biochar as a long-term soil carbon amendment and the specific production economics of small-scale biochar from wood waste feedstocks. He had sat in the 3rd row of metal folding chairs in an equipment shed and listened to the whole presentation, and then waited while 3 other people asked their questions and then asked his own, which was specific and which made Dr. Okafor look at him with the attention of someone who recognizes a question from a person who already understands the answer to the simpler questions. He had asked about the thermal efficiency differential between mixed hardwood species in batch pyrolysis and whether the high resin content of cherry and walnut feedstock affected the output quality or the process temperature management. She had answered in detail and had asked, at the end of her answer, what operation he was managing. He had told her. She had asked if she could visit the property. Dr. Patricia Okafor came to Patrick County in September of 2011 and spent a full day at Walter's property, examining the material streams and the kiln operation and the sorting and storage systems. She said the operation was better organized than most commercial wood waste processing facilities she had visited, and considerably better organized than any farm-based operation she had seen in Virginia. She said the feedstock quality, particularly the clean, sorted hardwood from the factory, was ideal for high-quality biochar production because it was free of contaminants, consistent in species, and dry, all three of which were conditions that commercial biochar producers paid substantial premiums to achieve, and that Walter was getting for free as a byproduct of the sorting process he had already established for the specialty wood market. She said the material he was currently not using, the smaller diameter offcuts, and the edge material that was too small for specialty wood sales and too good to burn as firewood, was essentially a premium biochar feedstock sitting in a pile waiting to be processed, and that the market for certified hardwood biochar as a soil amendment was growing in Virginia and the surrounding states, driven by the organic vegetable production sector and the nursery industry, and the increasingly active soil carbon market that was beginning to develop around carbon farming practices. Walter had listened to all of this and then asked her one question. He asked what the critical failure modes were for a small-scale biochar operation, the things that caused producers to lose money or lose customers. She said the same thing Carl Briggs had said about the specialty wood market 6 years earlier. She said consistency. She said biochar quality varied enormously by feedstock, temperature profile, and process management, and that buyers who had bad experiences with inconsistent biochar were not buyers for long and were not easy to bring back. She said the operations that succeeded in this market were the ones that treated every batch as a quality control exercise and maintained records precise enough to trace any batch back to its production parameters if a quality issue arose. Walter wrote that, in the same notebook, he had written the first lesson in 2005. Then he called Darnell and told him they were going to build a kiln. The biochar kiln, a cone-shaped steel retort that Walter had fabricated by a metal worker in Stuart, Virginia, went operational in the spring of 2013. Walter had spent 2 years before that attending every biochar production workshop he could find in the Mid-Atlantic region, reading every technical document Dr. Okafor sent him, and testing small-batch production methods in a modified barrel setup in the equipment shed. He had kept records of every test batch, the feedstock species mix, the moisture content at loading, the temperature profile across the run, the yield weight, and the quality characteristics of the output. By the time the production kiln was operational, he had 37 test batches documented, which was more data than most small-scale biochar producers had when they went to market. The first commercial biochar sale was to a certified organic vegetable grower in Floyd County in the fall of 2013. Walter had found him through a connection Dr. Okafor had made and had driven to the farm with a sample bag and the quality documentation from the most recent production batch, and had spent 2 hours answering the grower's questions about feedstock, production temperature, and mineral content. The grower had ordered a pallet. He had ordered another 6 months later and had sent 2 of his farming neighbors to Walter with his personal recommendation. Blue Ridge Soil and Timber LLC was incorporated in 2016, when the operation had grown to the point where sole proprietorship was no longer the appropriate legal structure, where Darnell was full-time and a second full-time employee had been added, where the covered storage building had been extended twice and was still not quite large enough, and where Walter had begun to think about the operation not as a farm-side project, but as a business with a defined product line, a defined customer base, and a defined growth path. The name had been Darnell's idea. He had said that what they were building was more than a farm and more than a wood business, and that it should have a name that said what it actually was, which was something that connected the timber culture of the Blue Ridge region with the soil building work they were doing with the biochar and the growing medium products. Walter had said that was a good name, and they had registered it the following month. The factory arrangement had been renewed informally with Gene Hartley's successor, when Gene retired in 2012, and again with the next plant manager in 2018, each time as an undocumented handshake arrangement that solved the factory's disposal problem reliably and at no cost to either party. The factory had never thought about what Walter was doing with the material, because from the factory's perspective, the material had left the property and ceased to be a concern. Walter had never felt any particular need to explain what he was doing with it, because the arrangement was clear and fair and had worked without friction for 20 years. The factory rep who arrived at the gate in August of 2024 had been sent to formalize or terminate an arrangement that his management had described as an informal neighbor accommodation. He had found instead a registered business with 2 full-time and 3 part-time employees, a covered production facility spanning 3 buildings totaling roughly 8,000 square feet of processing space, an annual revenue that he eventually estimated, from the information Walter shared with him, in the range of $400,000, and a product line that included specialty hardwood shorts sold to woodworkers across 6 states, kiln-dried premium firewood distributed through 4 regional dealers, hardwood biochar sold through both direct relationships with organic growers and through an online distribution platform covering the Mid-Atlantic and Southeastern states, and the Blue Ridge BioBlend bagged soil amendment currently listed in farm supply stores in 4 Virginia counties. Walter had met him at the gate and walked him through everything. Not to impress him, because the man had asked to understand what he was looking at, and Walter had spent 20 years building something worth explaining. The rep had asked, at the end of the walk, how much of this had Walter planned when the arrangement started in 2004. Walter had thought about that. He said he had not planned any of it specifically. He said he had planned the disposition to pay attention to what the material actually was and to understand what it could become before deciding what to do with it. He said the rest had come from following that disposition through each stage as it presented itself, asking the right people the right questions at the right time, and applying the same organizing principles he had learned in 22 years of warehouse management to a material stream that most people looked at and saw waste. The rep had asked him if the factory understood what had been built here. Walter had said no. He said the factory had seen a disposal solution. That was what they had needed, and that was what he had provided. He had not been dishonest about that. He had just also seen something else in the same material that the factory had not been looking for. The rep said he thought they were going to want to formalize the arrangement with a contract that reflected the actual relationship more accurately than the handshake had done. Walter said that would be fine. He said he would want the same terms he had always had, which was all clean, untreated hardwood scrap delivered to his collection area on a regular schedule, separated by species to the degree practical, at no cost to either party. He said he would want it in writing this time, and would have an attorney look at it before he signed anything. The rep said that was completely reasonable. Walter walked him back to the company truck and shook his hand. After the truck pulled out of the gate, he went back to the main building where Darnell was supervising the loading of the flatbed, and he stood there for a moment watching the operation with the specific satisfaction of a man looking at something he built from material that someone else considered worthless. Darnell saw him standing there and came over. He asked how it went with the factory. Walter said it went fine. He said they wanted to put the arrangement in writing. Darnell said it was about time. Walter said he supposed it was. He said it had worked well enough for 20 years without it. Darnell said it had worked because both sides had been straight with each other. Walter said that was right. He said that was usually the way things worked when they worked. Carl Briggs had called Walter in the fall of 2008, 4 years after their first meeting in Surry County, to tell him that one of his 2 factory supply arrangements had ended because the plant had closed and moved its production to another state. He had said it mattered less than he thought it would, because the operation had diversified enough by then that one source going away was a disruption rather than a crisis. He said that was the thing about building on waste material that most people did not understand when they started. The waste was reliable until it was not, and the operation had to be built in a way that could absorb that unreliability. Walter had written that in the notebook too. The operation has to be more durable than any single source. He had thought about it in the context of the Piedmont arrangement and had spent the winter of 2009 identifying secondary sources to reduce his dependence on any single supplier. A cabinet shop in Henry County that generated cherry and maple offcuts. A flooring installer in Roanoke who regularly had hardwood flooring tear-out material. A pallet repair operation in Martinsville that generated a stream of clean oak material that was excellent biochar feedstock. None were as large as the factory arrangement. Together, they added about 30% to the total material volume and reduced Walter's exposure to a manageable level. He had also made the decision that defined the business more than any other single choice. He had decided not to grow faster than his quality control systems could keep up with. The demand for the products was consistently ahead of the supply, and the market signal was always pushing toward expansion. He had watched what that push did to small specialty operations in the woodworking and agricultural supply sectors, which was that it caused them to cut corners on the quality control that the specialty market required, which caused the consistency to slip, which caused the premium customers to leave. He grew at the pace that allowed him to maintain the sorting and drying and grading standards at every stage. The BioBlend product had come from a conversation with a plant nursery owner in Floyd County in 2018 who had mentioned that she was buying biochar from one source, compost from a second source, and mycorrhizal inoculant from a third, and that blending them herself was inefficient. Walter had called Dr. Okafor the following week. By spring of 2019, after a year of sourcing components, developing the blending ratio, and building the bagging station, BioBlend went to market. By 2024, it was in 12 retail locations across 5 Virginia counties and 2 North Carolina counties, the highest margin product in the line. His son Marcus had joined the operation part-time in 2021 and full-time in 2023 after graduating from Radford University with a business degree. Marcus had done a formal business valuation in early 2024 and presented the results to Walter at the kitchen table. Walter had looked at the number for a long moment. Then he had asked Marcus to check the methodology. Marcus said he had checked it twice. He said the number was right. Walter had set the document down and looked out the window at the main building, lit from inside where Darnell was doing inventory, and thought about the Tuesday morning in 2004, when he had driven to the factory for the first time and loaded fireplace wood and thought about nothing more ambitious than staying warm through the winter. He went back to the sorting table where the morning's collection from the factory fence line had been staged. A load that included, as the loads always included, a mix of species and sizes and qualities that would require 2 hours of careful sorting before it moved into the drying system. He picked up the moisture meter and started at the beginning of the load, the way he had started at the beginning of every load for 20 years, reading each piece before deciding where it belonged in the system. The material was the same as it had always been. What had changed was the understanding of it, the 20 years of accumulated knowledge about what each species could become, and what each size was worth, and what each stage of the process required to produce a result that met the standard that consistency demanded. That knowledge was not in any document. It was in Walter and in Darnell and in the younger employees learning it from both of them. The way all knowledge about materials and process was eventually learned, which was by doing the work long enough and carefully enough that the material itself taught you what it had to say. He set the first piece in its place in the sorted stack and picked up the next one. The factory had been dumping wood scraps at his fence line for 20 years. He had built an empire from it, one sorted piece at a time, and the empire was still being built, one careful decision at a time, on the same organizing principle he had written in the notebook in 2005. Consistency is the product, not the wood. What most people who saw the Blue Ridge soil and timber operation for the first time didn't understand, and what Walter had learned only gradually across the years of building it, was that the business was not fundamentally about wood. It was about the specific kind of attention that allowed a person to see what something actually was, rather than what the most obvious interpretation of it said it was. The factory saw waste. Walter had seen material. The difference was not the material. The difference was the attention. He had been thinking about this more often in the past year, since Marcus had joined full-time and since the business valuation, and since the factory rep had sat in the company truck outside the gate, recalibrating everything he had been told about what he was going to find. He had been thinking about it because Marcus was asking him to articulate things that Walter had always done by feel and by accumulated habit, to put into language the reasoning behind decisions that Walter made without always being aware of making them. And the process of articulating things for Marcus was making Walter more conscious of what the things were and where they had come from. Marcus had asked him once, in the fall of 2023, what the most important decision was that Walter had made in building the operation. Walter had thought about this seriously because Marcus asked serious questions and deserved serious answers. He had said it was the decision to learn before doing, not to gather information indefinitely, not to plan without acting, but to understand what he was looking at before committing to what he was going to do with it. He said the library Saturdays in 2005 and the drive to Winston-Salem and the drive to Surrey County were not delays. They were the work. He said a man who started sorting and drying and selling without that groundwork would have built something that looked similar in the first year and looked very different in the fifth year. Because without the understanding, you could not make the decisions that compounded correctly over time. Marcus had asked what the second most important decision was. Walter had said it was hiring Darnell in 2009. He said an operation built on careful attention required people who were capable of careful attention, and that Darnell had that quality in the same natural way that some people had musical ability or spatial reasoning, as something that was genuinely part of how he engaged with work rather than something he performed when he thought someone was watching. He said you could teach most of the technical skills involved in the operation. He said you could not teach the disposition to care about the work at the level of detail that the work required, and that hiring someone who already had that disposition was worth more than any equipment purchase he had ever made. Darnell, if he had been present for that conversation, would probably have pointed out that Walter had that same disposition in the same natural way, and that it was the reason the operation existed at all. But Darnell was not present for the conversation, and he was not the kind of man who said things like that directly, even when he was present. So Walter had said what he said, and Marcus had written it down, and that was how it entered the record. The thing Walter had not said to Marcus, because it was harder to put into language than the operational decisions, was that the 20 years of building the business had taught him something about himself that the 22 years in the warehouse had not. The warehouse had taught him how to manage materials flow. The farm had taught him that the materials flow he had spent 22 years managing in someone else's building was a smaller version of a much larger principle, which was that most of the valuable things in the world were undervalued, because most people looked at them through the lens of the most obvious use, rather than the lens of what they actually were. The factory scraps were the clearest example he had ever encountered of that principle in practice. But they were not the only one. He had seen it in the hay ground that he had left in grass for years while thinking about what to do with it, and that had eventually become the staging and production space for the business. He had seen it in the old hay barn that had seemed like a deteriorating liability when he bought the farm, and that was now, after 15 years of incremental improvement, the heart of the sorting and drying operation. He had seen it in Darnell, who had been a young man with a strong back and no particular direction when Walter hired him, and who was now the operational backbone of a $400,000 business, and who had been, in Walter's view, undervalued by every employer who had not seen past the strong, back to the quality of attention underneath it. The last thing Walter did every evening before he left the production building was walk the sorting table and the drying racks and the finished goods storage, the way he had walked them every evening since 2006, reading the state of the operation against the standard he had set in the first year and maintained through every year since. Not looking for problems specifically, though he found them sometimes and addressed them before they became larger. Reading the operation the way he read the incoming material, looking for what was there rather than confirming what he expected to find. On the evening after the factory rep's visit, he had walked the building at his usual time and had found everything in order. The drying racks loaded correctly, the sorted stacks neat and correctly labeled, the biochar storage sealed, and the batch records current, the bioblend inventory logged, and the reorder point current. Everything correct, everything consistent. He had stood at the end of the building for a moment before turning off the lights, looking at the length of it, at the racks and the stacks and the equipment, and the organized evidence of 20 years of careful work, and had thought about the Tuesday morning 20 years ago when he had loaded fireplace wood at the factory fence line and driven home on Route 58, thinking about nothing more than the winter. He turned off the lights and went inside. The notebook was on the kitchen table where Marcus had left it after their morning conversation. Walter had looked at it before going to bed, at the first entry on the first page in his handwriting from 2005, the lesson from a man in Surrey County on a Saturday morning, that had turned out to be the organizing principle of everything that followed. Consistency is the product, not the wood. He closed the notebook and set it on the shelf and went to sleep. In the morning, the load from the factory fence line would be waiting at the collection area, the same mix of species and sizes and qualities that had been waiting there every 2 weeks for 20 years. And he would start at the beginning of it with the moisture meter and work through it piece by piece, reading each one before deciding where it belonged, the way he had done on the first morning and every morning since. The material was the same. The understanding of it was 20 years deeper. That was the empire, not the buildings or the revenue or the product line or the registered LLC. The 20 years of accumulated understanding of what the material actually was and what it could actually become in the hands of a person who was willing to pay the kind of attention that most people looked at, waste material, and did not think it deserved. He had thought it deserved that attention in 2004 and had been right. He still thought so. He would think so tomorrow morning when he picked up the moisture meter and started at the beginning of the next load. That was the whole of it. That was how it had always worked.